The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the narrow streets of the coastal town with a ferocity that seemed almost personal. Rain lashed against the cracked windows of an old diner, where the flickering neon sign outside sputtered in protest against the storm's relentless assault. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the faint smell of wet leather. A man sat hunched over at the counter, his broad shoulders slumped under the weight of exhaustion. His name was Marcus Kane, 32 years old, weathered beyond his years by a life of hard choices and even harder consequences. His calloused hands gripped a steaming mug of coffee, though it had long gone cold. The scar running down his left cheek twitched slightly as he clenched his jaw, staring out into the chaos outside. Marcus wasn't one for small talk or idle thoughts. Every moment spent inside this diner felt like borrowed time from a life spiraling further out of control. He'd been on edge ever since the layoffs hit the docks last month, leaving him without work and drowning in debts he couldn't outrun. His dark eyes scanned the room instinctively, taking in the other patrons. A trucker nursing a cigarette at the far booth, two teenagers whispering nervously near the jukebox, their faces pale under the dim light. None of them mattered. Not tonight. Tonight, all that mattered was surviving another day. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. Outside, a massive oak tree toppled onto a parked car, its branches clawing at the sky before collapsing completely. The diner shook violently, and someone screamed. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, but his grip tightened around the mud. This storm wasn't just nature flexing its muscles. It felt alive, predatory, feeding off fear. And then came the cry. It started faintly, almost drowned out by the roar of the wind, but it grew louder. A desperate, raw plea for help cutting through the din. Marcus froze, his heart pounding like a war drum. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket from the stool beside him and bolted toward the door, ignoring the protests of the diner owner yelling after him to stay put. The icy rain hit him like needles as soon as he stepped outside, soaking him instantly. Visibility was near zero, the world reduced to swirling shadows and flashes of lightning that illuminated the devastation around him. But there was again, the voice, clearer now, trembling with panic. "Help, please, someone." It was coming from somewhere down the street, past the wreckage of overturned trash bins and shattered storefront windows. Marcus broke into a sprint, his boots slipping on the slick pavement as he fought against the gale-force winds. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just because of the waterlogged ground, but because something deep inside him whispered that this night would change everything. For better or worse, he couldn't say. All he knew was that turning back wasn't an option, not when someone needed saving. The cries grew sharper, more frantic, as Marcus pushed forward, his body battered by the storm's unrelenting fury. Lightning streaked across the sky, briefly illuminating the skeletal remains of buildings stripped bare by the wind. The once familiar streets were now alien landscapes of debris and destruction. A lamppost groaned ominously overhead, its metal frame bending precariously as if ready to snap and crush anyone beneath it. Marcus ducked instinctively, his breath hitching as he pressed onward. Ahead, a figure stumbled into view, silhouetted against the jagged glow of another lightning strike. It was her, a young woman, barely visible through the sheets of rain, clutching the remnants of what looked like a designer handbag to her chest. Her hair whipped wildly around her face, plastered to her skin by the downpour. She tripped over a loose chunk of concrete, landing hard on her knees with a strangled gasp. Marcus's stomach clenched at the sight. He shouted above the roar of the storm, "Hold on, I'm coming." She turned toward him, her wide eyes reflecting both terror and relief. Her lips moved, forming words lost to the wind, but her desperation was unmistakable. Marcus surged forward, his legs burning with effort as he closed the distance between them. Just as he reached her, another explosion of thunder rattled the ground beneath their feet. The woman flinched violently, nearly collapsing again, but Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. "You're okay," he barked, his voice rough but firm. "Stay close to me." She nodded frantically, her teeth chattering from either shock or cold, or both. Up close, Marcus could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, dressed in clothes far too impractical for such conditions. A sleek trench coat soaked through, heels now caked with mud. Despite her disheveled state, there was something about her, her posture, the way she carried herself, that hinted at privilege. But Marcus didn't have time to dwell on it. Survival was the only priority. "We need shelter," he yelled, scanning their surroundings. The nearest building stood half-collapsed, its roof sagging dangerously low. No good. Another structure loomed farther ahead, its outline distorted by the driving rain. "Can you run?" I think so," she stammered, her voice trembling. Without waiting for further confirmation, Marcus looped an arm around her waist, pulling her upright. Together, they staggered forward, each step a battle against the elements. The wind tore at them mercilessly, threatening to rip the woman from his grasp. At one point, she slipped again, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her. She cried out, clutching at Marcus with renewed urgency. "Don't stop," he urged, hoisting her closer. "Just a little farther." They finally reached the shadow of a partially intact warehouse, its heavy steel doors offering some semblance of refuge. Marcus shoved one open with brute force, the hinges screeching in protest. They stumbled inside, gasping for air as the relative calm enveloped them. The interior was dark and damp, the scent of mildew mingling with the metallic tang of rust. Marcus leaned the woman against a stack of crates, his own chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his tone sharper than he intended. "This isn't safe." Her gaze darted to the floor, guilt flickering across her features. "I got stranded. My car broke down miles back. I thought I could make it to town. Alone? In this?" Marcus gestured wildly toward the storm raging outside. "Are you insane?" She flinched at his words, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Then, softly, she said, "Thank you for helping me." Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his drenched hair. Whatever frustration he felt melted slightly at the sincerity in her voice. "You're welcome," he muttered gruffly. "But we're not out of this yet. We'll wait here until the worst passes." As they huddled together in the dimness, Marcus couldn't shake the nagging sense that this encounter was no accident. Something about her, the way she carried herself despite her obvious fear, the faint traces of elegance even in her disarray, didn't add up. But he pushed the thought aside. Right now, survival came first. Everything else could wait. The storm outside showed no signs of relenting, its fury battering the warehouse walls with a relentless rhythm that echoed through the cavernous space. Inside, the air was thick with moisture and the palpable tension of two strangers bound by circumstance. Marcus leaned against a rusted beam, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness, while the young woman sat perched on a wooden crate, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her earlier gratitude had faded into a contemplative silence, punctuated only by the occasional shiver that ran through her slender frame. "You've got guts." Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice a mix of admiration and incredulity. Not many people would venture out alone in a storm like this. Her head snapped up, surprise flickering across her delicate features. "Desperation can make you do reckless things," she replied softly, her voice tinged with a vulnerability that tugged at Marcus's hardened heart. He studied her closely, noting the subtle shift in her demeanor. Beneath the layers of fear and fatigue, there was a resilience, an inner strength that intrigued him. "There's more to your story, isn't there?" He probed gently, sensing her guardedness. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap where her fingers nervously twisted the strap of her ruined handbag. After a pause, she sighed deeply. "My name is Evelyn," she began, her voice steadier now. "Evelyn Sterling." The name hung in the air, heavy with implications Marcus couldn't quite place. He frowned, his instincts tingling. "Sterling? As in?" He trailed off, his mind racing through possibilities. "As in the Sterlings who own half the businesses in this state," she finished for him, a bitter smile playing on her lips. "Yes, that's Sterling." Marcus's eyes widened slightly, though he quickly masked his reaction. The Sterlings were legendary, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. And here she was, Evelyn Sterling, dripping wet and vulnerable, sitting in a decrepit warehouse during a hurricane. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I didn't choose this," Evelyn continued, her voice gaining strength. "My father sent me away to protect me," he said, "but all I feel is trapped, suffocated by expectations and secrets." She paused, looking directly at Marcus, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Tonight, I just wanted to escape, even if just for a moment." Marcus listened intently, his initial skepticism giving way to empathy. There was pain in her confession, a longing for freedom that resonated with his own struggles. "Running doesn't solve much," he said quietly, his tone less harsh than before. "But sometimes, it's the only thing keeping us sane." Evelyn nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know, but being out there, facing the storm, it made me feel alive and control. Until I wasn't." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the relentless howl of the wind outside. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to bridge the gap between their vastly different worlds. Yet, there was a connection forming, fragile but undeniable. "You don't seem like the typical billionaire's daughter," he remarked finally, his curiosity getting the better of him. Evelyn chuckled dryly, wiping her tears. "And you don't seem like the typical dock worker." Appearances can be deceiving, Marcus. Her use of his name startled him momentarily, but he recovered quickly, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "Touché." They shared a brief laugh, the tension easing slightly. In that fleeting moment, the storm outside seemed distant, the world reduced to just the two of them sharing confidences in the dim light of the warehouse. For Marcus, it was a rare glimpse into a life of privilege marred by its own set of challenges, while for Evelyn, it was an unexpected encounter with someone who saw her as more than just a surname. As the conversation lulled, Marcus found himself pondering the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Little did he know, this night was merely the beginning of a journey that would unravel truths far beyond what either of them could imagine. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the dissipating clouds, the storm's ferocity waned into a gentle drizzle, casting a surreal glow over the ravaged landscape. Inside the warehouse, Marcus and Evelyn sat in a companionable silence, the night's revelations still hanging heavily in the air. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Suddenly, the distant hum of engines sliced through the morning quiet. Marcus stood abruptly, his protective instincts kicking in as he moved to shield Evelyn from whatever approached. Peering through a crack in the warehouse door, his eyes widened at the sight that greeted him. Two sleek helicopters descended from the gray skies, their rotors slicing through the moist air with precision. They hovered momentarily before touching down in the clearing just beyond the warehouse, sending a spray of water and debris flying. "Stay here," Marcus instructed Evelyn, his voice firm yet tinged with concern. Ignoring his command, Evelyn rose to stand beside him, her eyes fixed on the spectacle outside. From the helicopters emerged a team of men in sharp suits, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Leading them was a tall, imposing figure whose resemblance to Evelyn was unmistakable. Her father, Richard Sterling. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of dread and relief washing over her. "It's my father," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the whirring blades. Before Marcus could respond, the group began advancing towards the warehouse, their expressions grim yet determined. Richard Sterling entered first, his commanding presence filling the space. His eyes locked onto Evelyn, softening momentarily before hardening as they shifted to Marcus. "Evelyn," he addressed her, his voice a blend of authority and underlying emotion. "Are you all right?" "Yes, father," Evelyn replied, stepping forward, her composure regained. "Thanks to Marcus." Richard's gaze returned to Marcus, assessing him with a scrutiny that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. "Mr. Kane, I presume," he asked, extending a hand which Marcus shook cautiously. "That's right," Marcus confirmed, standing his ground despite the overwhelming aura of power emanating from the elder Sterling. Richard nodded, a hint of respect flickering in his eyes. You have my gratitude. Few would brave such conditions to aid a stranger. Before Marcus could respond, Evelyn interjected, her tone resolute. Father, Marcus didn't just save me from the storm. He understood me when no one else did. He saw beyond the name and the wealth. Richard's expression softened further, pride swelling within him at his daughter's words. Then it seems we owe Mr. Kane more than mere thanks. Perhaps an opportunity to discuss how we might assist him in return. The proposition hung in the air, heavy with potential. Marcus glanced at Evelyn, her hopeful eyes mirroring the sunrise breaking through the clouds. In that moment, amidst the aftermath of chaos and revelation, a new path stretched out before him, one paved with possibilities previously unimaginable. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the warehouse, Marcus felt a profound shift within him. The storm had not only cleared the skies, but also swept away the barriers of his past, presenting a future intertwined with destinies far greater than his own. With a final look at Evelyn, who smiled encouragingly, he stepped forward into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The ride back to the Sterling estate was a blur of luxury and disbelief for Marcus. Seated in one of the helicopters, the opulence surrounding him felt surreal compared to the gritty reality he'd known. Evelyn sat beside him, her presence a comforting anchor amidst the whirlwind of change. Below, the city sprawled out, its scars from the storm stark against the morning light. Yet, in the helicopter's cabin, a different kind of storm brewed within Marcus. Questions of identity, worth, and the sudden pivot his life had taken. As they landed on the expansive grounds of the Sterling mansion, Marcus stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The grandeur of the estate was overwhelming, a testament to power and influence that seemed galaxies away from his modest beginnings. Richard Sterling approached, his demeanor now warmer, inviting. Mr. Kane, he began, extending a hand, let us discuss your future. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. They moved to a lavish study, where Richard gestured for Marcus to sit. Your courage and integrity last night were commendable, Richard stated, his voice carrying the weight of authority tempered with genuine appreciation. We Sterlings value loyalty and bravery. You've shown both. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Sterling, but I'm just a man trying to get by. And that is precisely why we wish to offer you more, Richard countered, leaning forward. Join us, Marcus. Use your skills and spirit to help lead our security division. You'll have resources, opportunities, and most importantly, a chance to make a real difference. The proposal hung in the air, heavy with promise and peril. Marcus glanced at Evelyn, who watched him with hopeful eyes. This wasn't just about escaping poverty. It was about forging a new identity, one aligned with values he hadn't dared dream possible. I need time to think, he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Later, as Marcus wandered the sprawling gardens, the weight of decision pressed upon him. He thought of his past, the betrayals, the struggles, the nights spent wondering if tomorrow would come. Here was a chance to rewrite his story, to rise above the ashes of his former life. Yet, the fear of losing himself in this world of wealth and power lingered. Evelyn found him there, her steps light on the dew-kissed grass. You're considering it, aren't you? She asked, her voice soft yet probing. I am, Marcus admitted, turning to face her. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about proving that someone like me can thrive in a place like this, without losing who I am. Evelyn smiled, a gesture full of understanding and support. You won't lose yourself, Marcus. You'll find parts of you that were always there, waiting to shine. Her words resonated deeply, igniting a spark of determination within him. By accepting the Sterling's offer, Marcus wasn't just stepping into a new role. He was embracing a new version of himself, one forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the winds of change. As the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the estate, Marcus felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, but the journey ahead promised challenges that would test his newfound resolve. With a deep breath, Marcus made his decision. Tomorrow, he would begin anew, armed with the lessons of his past and the unwavering support of unexpected allies. The road to redemption was fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time, Marcus Kane walked it with hope lighting his way. The weeks that followed Marcus's decision to join the Sterling Empire unfolded like pages of a novel written in bold strokes and vivid colors. Every morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, Marcus found himself standing at the window of his newly assigned office, a corner suite with panoramic views of the city skyline. The transformation from struggling dockworker to head of the Sterling Security Division had been nothing short of seismic. Yet Marcus carried himself with a quiet confidence that surprised even those closest to him. He wasn't the same man who had braved the storm that fateful night. He was stronger, sharper, and more self-assured. But beneath the surface, the echoes of his past still lingered, shaping the choices he made and the person he was becoming. At first, the transition wasn't easy. The corporate world was a labyrinth of politics, egos, and hidden agendas, and Marcus often felt like an outsider navigating unfamiliar terrain. Colleagues whispered behind his back, questioning whether a man with no formal education or elite connections could truly lead. Some dismissed him outright, assuming his appointment was a fleeting act of gratitude from Richard Sterling. But Marcus refused to let doubt take root. Instead, he leaned on the lessons he'd learned growing up in hardship: resilience, resourcefulness, and an unshakable work ethic. Slowly but surely, he earned their respect, not through grand gestures, but through consistent action. When crises arose, Marcus was the first to step forward, his calm demeanor and strategic thinking diffusing tensions and solving problems others deemed insurmountable. Evelyn became his closest ally during this time, her belief in him unwavering. She often joined him late into the evenings, poring over reports or brainstorming solutions to complex challenges. Their bond deepened, evolving into something neither had anticipated: a partnership built on mutual trust and admiration. Evelyn admired Marcus's authenticity, the way he cut through pretense with blunt honesty. For Marcus, Evelyn represented a beacon of hope, a reminder that privilege didn't have to corrupt and that compassion could coexist with power. Together, they formed a dynamic duo, challenging the status quo and pushing the Sterling Empire toward a more ethical and inclusive future. Yet, Marcus's journey wasn't without its darker moments. The ghosts of his past occasionally surfaced, haunting him in quiet hours when the weight of his responsibilities felt unbearable. Memories of friends lost to addiction, jobs abandoned due to layoffs, and promises broken by those he trusted most would creep into his mind, threatening to undo the progress he'd made. On one particularly grueling night, after a high-stakes meeting left him drained and disillusioned, Marcus retreated to the rooftop garden of the Sterling estate. The city lights twinkled below, a stark contrast to the storm clouds gathering in his thoughts. Evelyn found him there, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," she said softly, joining him by the railing. Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes it feels like I am. All these people counting on me, decisions that affect lives. I never asked for this kind of responsibility. But you've handled it better than anyone expected," Evelyn replied, her voice firm yet gentle. "Including yourself." He turned to her, his expression conflicted. "What if I fail? What if I'm not enough?" "You won't," she said simply. "Because failure isn't an option for you. Not anymore. You've already proven that you can rise above anything life throws at you. Now it's about believing in that truth." Her words struck a chord, reigniting the fire within him. Failure wasn't an option, not when so much depended on his success. Not when he had Evelyn by his side, cheering him on. Not when he owed it to the man he used to be to show that redemption wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. As the months passed, Marcus's impact on the Sterling Empire became undeniable. Under his leadership, the security division underwent a complete overhaul, implementing cutting-edge technology and fostering a culture of accountability and transparency. Scandals that once plagued the company were addressed head-on, earning public trust and bolstering the brand's reputation. Marcus also championed initiatives aimed at uplifting marginalized communities, channeling resources into programs that provided job training, education, and housing assistance. For the first time in years, the The sterling name began to symbolize not just wealth and influence, but also compassion and integrity. One evening, as Marcus stood alongside Richard and Evelyn at a charity gala celebrating the launch of a new foundation dedicated to supporting underprivileged youth, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The room buzzed with energy, filled with people inspired by the vision Marcus and Evelyn had helped create. As cameras flashed and applause erupted, Marcus caught Evelyn's eye. She smiled, her pride evident, and in that moment, he realized something extraordinary. He wasn't just rebuilding his life. He was creating a legacy. But the journey wasn't solely about professional triumphs. On a personal level, Marcus discovered a depth of character he hadn't known existed. The boy who had grown up fighting for scraps had become a man who fought for justice, equality, and the dignity of others. He learned to forgive, not just those who had wronged him, but also himself for the mistakes he'd made along the way. And in forgiving, he found peace. The storm that had brought him to Evelyn's rescue had been a catalyst, a force of nature that reshaped his destiny. But it was Marcus's choices afterward, the courage to embrace change, the willingness to confront his fears, and the determination to forge a better path, that defined his story. As he looked out at the sea of faces gathered in celebration, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The storm had passed, but the best was yet to come.